Medical science is making extraordinary strides against a wide range of diseases, from rare genetic diseases to common but no less deadly maladies such as heart disease and cancer. Perhaps no therapies have had a greater impact thus far than those broadly defined as immunotherapy. It has now enabled treatment and even cures for cancers not amenable to the classic surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy triad. But cancer immunotherapy is a very broad field, encompassing a variety of checkpoint inhibitor drugs from Genentech, Roche, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Merck, and others that essentially take the brakes off a patient's own immune system, allowing it to attack the cancer. Another exciting immunotherapy is known as CAR-T therapy from Novartis, Kite, and Juno, among others. This entails genetically modifying a patient's T cells to recognize tumor cell markers, and they've been curative against certain leukemias and lymphomas. A number of companies are also developing CAR-T approaches to solid tumors. However, possibly the area of immunology that has most captured the public's imagination is stem cells. Their potential, still not well realized, is immense, for everything from cancer therapy to growing replacement organs in the lab, regenerating and repairing worn, aging, or damaged tissues, and even cosmetic applications. But procuring enough cells to meet the potential demand, particularly if they must be matched to the tissue type of the recipient, will be challenging. That is where the unique characteristics of placental cells come in. Those extraordinarily plentiful cells are not only generic, meaning they needn't be tissue-typed, they may also be an abundant source of natural killer, or NK cells. NK cells can destroy tumor cells, as well as virally infected cells, as in COVID-19 disease. This is a special three-part session on novel approaches and platforms for treating disease. Part 1, Revolutionizing Cell Therapy, features Dr. Robert Hariri, founder and CEO of Celularity, and Celularity Director, Dr. Andrew Pecora. So let's start out with, there's a lot of work being done in cell therapy, and that's a pretty big tent, right? You've got stem cells, you've got NK cells, CAR-T cells, all kinds of different cells. Let's talk about the particular area that Celularity is working in, which is placental cells. That, I think, is a little bit of a surprise to many people. What is it about placental cells that are unique and that makes it you guys where you really want to focus your energies?
Well, you know, Max, the three of us have really been actively involved in this field for the last 2 decades. And what we are very grateful is that there's been progress made in cellular medicine in the area of immunotherapy for cancer, and that's driving the entire field forward. What we recognized many years ago, Andrew and I in parallel, was that for cellular medicine to become a meaningful part of healthcare, someone was going to have to figure out a way to productize, to pharmaceuticalize living cells. The ideal source material for the platform from which you create these medicines, these cellular medicines, just turns out to be the leftovers of a full-term healthy pregnancy. At the dawn of cellular stem cell biology and cellular medicine, the concern was you might have to use embryonic or fetal materials, which are very problematic for many, many reasons. But consider that the placenta is essentially nature's stem cell factory, and 130 million times a year in the world, this organ is disposed of. It's just the perfect raw material. So simply enough, the placenta is where we can get stem, progenitor, and even mature cells like immune cells that can be turned into medicines.
So Andrew, most disease processes involve cells either mutating or somehow losing their normal function, or what we would normally consider their normal function. How do placental cells fit into this? Do they correct the aberrant cells, or do they just replace them? How do they fit into that framework?
So, Max, that's a great question. You know, when you think about it from a holistic perspective, if you're using a cell therapy to treat a disease, there are two basic things that you want to accomplish. In diseases where the immune system is abnormal, meaning it's overactive like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, you want to tamper down the immune system. In other diseases like cancer, where, as you suggested, you have a mutation, and that confers to those cells an unrestricted growth ability that can just grow like crazy, what we call cancer, you want to kill those cells. What's unique about the placenta, it has the obvious ability to regulate the immune system because it exists in the mom for 9 months and keeps the fetus healthy. So as inherent within its properties, its native properties, the ability to have a normal immune system, not an overreactive immune system. And what we have learned and what we have productized is the ability to take some of those cells and turn them into effective killer cells, NK cells, that can kill cancer cells, and that they're not antigen restricted, meaning that you don't have to have a target to go after. They can go after anything that's cancer, and they can kill virally infected cells. And the beauty of NK cells, particularly placental NK cells, is they can go after any virus. So whether or not it's COVID, a mutant of COVID, or a bad flu or anything else. And as it relates to T cells, those are antigen restricted. But when you have an antigen that's unique to the cancer, like CD19 for ALL, as an example, you can target CD19 and not hurt the patient and get rid of all the cancer cells.
So is it fair to say then that these cells that we're talking about not only are, as you said, not antigen restricted, meaning they're kind of generic. We don't have to tissue match them like you would in a stem cell transplant, right? And cells seem to know what they need to do. It sounds like, you put them in the right situation and they kind of figure out, well, I need to regulate the immune system over here, or I need to kill these bad guys over there.
Take this one, Bob.
Yeah. The way we look at it is nature's a lot smarter than we are. The cells from the placenta are designed, as Andrew pointed out, to be a universal donor cell and tissue that allows it to exist in an unmatched recipient and take on the functionality of cells that might be defective or deficient in that recipient. Now, interestingly enough, the fact that placental cells are, for lack of a better word, they're very young and naive. They lend themselves very well to all the manipulations to enhance certain functions, like as Andrew pointed out, going after a specific target. They also, by virtue of that naivete, they are less likely to induce any of the immunologic reactions that cause complications, things like graft versus host disease. And we have built over the last 2 decades great experience in the tools necessary to manipulate and alter the functions of those cells, but the sky's the limit. Andrew and I have been talking for over 20 years about the future of cellular medicine being that if you have a platform of cells that's reliable, scalable, high quality, and has acceptable economics, you can literally apply all of the breakthroughs in genetic modification and engineering, et cetera, in order to drive them towards a therapeutic use that's meaningful in a disease, whether it be an immune disease or cancer.
And Max, one of the important things that is going to become a mainstay in this conversation about cell therapies is a fundamental concept in biology called stemness. The more stemness you have, the more you can do. When you think about it, it's just obvious. The fertilized egg, how many replications does that need to go to with fidelity to result in a fetus, then a baby, then an adult that lives for 90 years, as compared to cells taken from a 50 or 60-year-old? There's log order greater stemness from placental-derived cells than any other cell source that you can have. And that's
more capacity to become different tissues.
Well, not just that, not just that, that's true, but even more than that, the ability to grow rapidly and maintain their integrity without genetic mutations, without getting tired, without running out of gas. If you take a cell from a placenta, that's going to turn into an adult man or woman that lives 90 years. All of that biologic potential is housed in these cells. And we have figured out how to harness that power, that stemness, and turn it into therapeutics for the greater good.
And you know, Max, this is becoming so increasingly relevant, not just to things like immunotherapy, but even to the future applications in other more mainstream diseases. As Andrew pointed out, the ability for a cell to go through that number of cell cycles and that number of cell divisions and still maintain its synthetic and differentiation integrity is incredibly important for the future of cellular medicine.
Another important aspect, I think, here, we hear a lot about, particularly in cancer therapy, CAR T cells, right? And they're manipulated, genetically manipulated and engineered, but they are bespoke cells. I've always wanted to use that word in a sentence. Bespoke, one-off cells, right? They're one of a kind. With the placental cells, we don't need to take and do one treatment that is unique for each individual patient.
Yeah, that's correct, Max. And this was the brilliance of Bob Hariri some 25 years ago. He was prescient in his view that instead of having to have a single patient be their own source of material, which is this so-called bespoke model, it's complicated, it's expensive, it stresses out the patient because they don't know that their cells are healthy enough. These are heavily treated cancer patients. Their cells may never make it back to them, even in time. Whereas Bob's view was, let's create an allogeneic source that could be good for anybody and could be used whenever they're needed.
And even better than that, good for anyone, meaning that you don't have to mix, you don't have to match, but it's a one size fits all product. But also, just from what Andrew described, this ability to essentially repopulate an entire human being until they're 90 means that starting material in a manufacturing environment can produce so many doses that one placenta donor can serve thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of recipients. That scalability is vitally important to this becoming part of a meaningful therapeutic regime. So, the cells from the placenta, readily available raw material resource. Remember, we collect placentas at 40 weeks gestational age, plus or minus 2 weeks. The biological consistency of that source, compare it to adult autologous donors who have to provide their own cells at a time they've been diagnosed with disease. No two patients are the same. They're different ages, they have different biological histories, different epigenetic modifications to their cells. So imagine you have highly variable entry material into a manufacturing process in autologous CAR T. What comes out is going to be highly variable. In comparison, placental cells go in with a great deal of biological consistency, and what comes out at the other end is also consistent.
And you brought up manufacturing. Manufacturing cells and turning them into a therapeutic is not the same as making aspirin or acetaminophen or any number of other medications. How do you handle that? How do you make sure that you've got the same, that you in fact have the same product coming out of the other end of the manufacturing process?
It's a great question. When we first embarked upon this, our dream was that we were going to figure out a way to expand the number of cells from a specific donor into quantities sufficient not only to treat them, but to treat many other patients. And we needed to create a system for that expansion that was extremely reliable, wasn't dependent, for example, on enormous outside reagents and factors, and could ultimately be reusable and consistent between donors. And that's what we've done here at Celularity. Our manufacturing environment uses a highly choreographed process from which the raw placenta, the organ itself, is used to isolate cells that are the starting material. Those cells go into, in essence, a cultivation environment. Think of it like a bioreactor. And the cells expand, they duplicate and duplicate, and we do it so that they don't necessarily get driven to differentiate, meaning that they maintain that stem cell phenotype characteristic. Then we isolate those cells and then can drive them down different lineages if we want, for example, immune cells, or they can be used in their pluripotent stem cell form, because those cells even have their own biologic characteristics that are useful medically. But the manufacturing, and Andrew is an expert in this as well. He's created many companies in the space. The manufacturing investment companies had to make to be able to make reliable products has been enormous. It's taken decades.
And one of the important points, Max, getting back to your point before, is that because of the stemness property of these cells, they grow like weeds. 1 million cells, within a month, you have hundreds and hundreds of billions of cells. So one placenta can result in the products for hundreds, if not thousands of patients. So the cost of goods sold, the economy of scale, to turn this into a true pharmaceutical is a reality because of the inherent property of the cells.
And remember, if you look at alternative sources, adult-derived cells that have to be driven to expand and proliferate, or in the case of induced pluripotent cells, they have to be tricked into behaving like stem cells. All those efforts are unnecessary when you're starting with material from the placenta that already does these things and doesn't have to be engineered and manipulated and has a great deal of biological consistency. So that stemness and the fact that this raw material resource is so abundant makes our original discovery of this organ as a source of these cells, we think, quite important.
And Andrew, we're just about out of time, but before, right at the beginning, you mentioned NK cells and some of the other uses that you might put to. Give me a little shopping list, because this sounds so exciting. What's the shopping list of ways that you foresee being able to use these cells?
So genetically modified T cells to go after specific targets when that's appropriate. NK cells to go after generic targets when that's appropriate, either cancer or virally infected cells, and mesenchymal-derived pluripotent cells to reestablish proper immunity across the broad array of human illnesses. And then the final frontier is regeneration of damaged tissue or tissue that's aging.
And one last word, Bob, how far off is the future?
You know, Max, first of all, we're very, very happy that we're now in an environment, Andrew and I now are in an environment where we're increasing the pace and the tempo of development and innovation and invention and so on. I actually think that in the next 3 years, we will see a massive increase in the number of immunotherapy products available for cancer and immune disease. That is going to catalyze more activity in the use of these cells in degenerative diseases. And then all of us, it's relevant for the three of us, we are looking to the future where this same source will provide cells that will actually preserve our performance, and preservation of human performance is the next frontier for cellular medicine. And that means that individuals can receive essentially augmentative therapy where these cells support the failing or deficient populations that are no longer doing their job, fixing our cartilage, making our hair grow, et cetera. And that, I think, that's the horizon that I care a lot about.
Max, I think he called us old.
He's the one with the gray beard. I don't know. Bob, Andrew Pecora, thank you. It truly does sound exciting. I look forward to the future very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Max.
Great to see you, Max.